Hey all, welcome. We have people still coming in. I'm going to give it just a minute. Beautiful. All right, we'll let people keep trickling in as we get started. Um, Hello, my name is Tiffany Goodwin Van Camp. I'm the Executive Director of American Friends of Combatants for Peace, and thank you for joining us today. If this is your first talk with us, Combatants for Peace is a joint Palestinian Israeli community working in solidarity to end the occupation, discrimination, and oppression. We believe in a world where all people, from the river to the sea, live in peace with dignity, justice, and liberty. The movement was founded almost 20 years ago by Israeli and Palestinian fighters from opposing sides who chose to lay down their weapons and work together for peace and justice. They've been nominated 2 times for Nobel Peace Prize. American Friends is the US arm of the movement, and all of us here make up a diverse community that extends beyond borders to work for collective liberation in Palestine and Israel and in our own communities. Today, we kick off our Collective Ed Summer Series, a film festival called Films for Freedom. The goal of this festival is to provide us with free access to 3 diverse films and their filmmakers who will both challenge and inspire us. The diversity of the films reflects our values of curiosity, learning from each other, radical intimacy, and unity without uniformity. The film we're discussing today is Israelism, and our moderator Gili will introduce our speakers. Before he does that, I would like to take a moment to introduce Gili. Gili Getz is an Israeli-American artist, news editor, published writer, actor, activist, and the board president of American Friends of Combatants for Peace. Gili is such a gift to not just our movement, but to our entire field. And it's really special that he's moderating today because he's also a producer with Israelism. Some quick housekeeping for all of us. This talk will be an hour. It will be recorded, and we will send you all a copy of the recording tomorrow. If you have questions for the speakers, and we would love to receive your questions and share them, please send them to Lindsay and Nicole, staff at American Friends, who their titles for their names say "Send Questions Here," and they will share them with our moderator. And with that, I want to hand things over to Gili.
Thank you so much, Tiffany, and thank you for all the people that put this webinar together, and our guests, and all of you who came to hear a conversation about this film and about collective liberation. It's such an honor to be part of this incredible joint community, and we are very grateful for you being with us today. I'd just like to say a few words about this great moment of despair. Our fight now is focusing on demanding a ceasefire and an end to the 9 months relentless Israeli bombardment and indiscriminate killing in Gaza following the Hamas October 7th attack, full hostage prisoner deal, rebuilding and healing Gaza, ending the occupation and the ethnic cleansing and violent annexation of areas like Masaferiata in the South Hebron Hills, who are facing accelerated settler and state violence, ending the war in the north with Hezbollah, and returning all displaced Israelis and Palestinians to their home, recognizing Palestine and beginning to build peace and equality for all Palestinians and Israelis, free from violence, supremacy, ultranationalism, religious fanaticism, authoritarianism, and hate in Israel, Palestine, here in America, and around the world. CFP is a part of a planned protest tomorrow with a coalition of organizations calling to stop the war. The Ben Gvir police just announced that they are prohibiting the march because they can protect it from right-wing violence. This is part of a widespread crackdown on any voices of dissent. The Israeli government is continuing an authoritarian coup in Israel. It's Israel, a country deeply traumatized by the October 7 attack, while sacrificing the hostages held by Hamas and all Israelis, despite a deal on the table that could have ended this war months ago. And we're calling to face the truth that supremacy will keep none of us free and none of us safe, that we will not bomb and kill ourselves into a better future, that total victory means endless bloodshed, death, and destructions. I'm so personally excited to have our speakers, since they mean so much to me and to all of us. Simone Zimmerman. Simone is the protagonist of Israelism and the co-founder of If Not Now. Sami Awad is a Palestinian nonviolent activist and the co-director of Nonviolence International. He's the founder and former executive director of the Holy Land Trust in Bethlehem. Sami engaged himself locally and globally to promoting teaching and engaging in nonviolence, healing, and collective trauma, and transformation work. He has spoken and held workshops in different countries, communities, and political and religious organizations. Erin Axelman. Erin is a queer Jewish filmmaker based out of Somerville, Massachusetts. Israelism is their directorial debut. Erin and Sam founded Tikkun Olam Productions, a nonprofit filmmaking collective that focuses on documenting and supporting movements for justice. I met Erin and Sam in 2017. We were both all fascinated with the emergence of the If Not Now movement that gave voice and faces to a phenomena I was seeing spreading in our Jewish community of young American Jews who were going through a profound transformation process after encountering Palestinian experience that was largely erased from their education. An education and culture that largely dehumanized Palestinian identity itself. And the role that the community played, our community played in upholding the occupation, and I believe in destroying both the Palestinian and Jewish Israeli future. I was fascinated by this transformation because I went through it and still going through it myself. And like Erin and Sam, was interested in telling that story of transformation in our communities and within ourselves. Many members of the Combatants for Peace movement and community who find this joint path of nonviolence and shared struggle for freedom go through a transformation that allows them to hold what is our radical views in both societies of partnership and joint struggle, especially giving the mass power imbalance and asymmetry in this conflict. The transformation is central to our movement, and we believe in our path of liberation of all people from the river to the sea. So, Erin, it's so great to be in conversation with you, my friend. Can you speak about your own transformation? What led you to make this film? And especially what type of conversation came up around the film in the screenings with young Jews, with the Jewish establishment, and with Palestinian audiences we were so excited to have?
Yeah, and thank you all so much for being here. Again, thank you to the amazing panelists. Sami, you're a huge inspiration to me, and obviously I'm so grateful that you're part of Israelism. And Simone, you obviously have been a big inspiration to me too. And Gili was one of the first people to really believe in the film, which I truly appreciate. My transformation is related to those of the main characters in the film, though slightly different. The stories that we tell in Israelism are extremely common Jewish stories in America, but of course the American-Jewish relationship with Israel exists on a spectrum. So I didn't go to Jewish day school, but I did go to Hebrew school growing up, and I really fell in love with the traditional pro-Israel narrative. I grew up in a very small Jewish community. I was made fun of for being Jewish. My family fled violent anti-Semitism, and it was always very difficult to try to formulate a positive Jewish identity. in the face of the anti-Semitism my family faced, as well as the kind of isolation as a young Jewish person in a largely rural conservative area. And so being told the traditional pro-Israel story of how Israel was founded and the Zionist movement was incredibly empowering to me. It felt like it was a narrative that could help redefine myself. It made me feel strong, like I was connected to the larger Jewish community. And it really was what tied me to Judaism. Like many of the characters in the film, Israel really became my form of Judaism, and it really became the center of my Jewish identity. But very luckily, I had a teacher in my public high school who knew my family and knew how progressive we were. And I was doing an independent study with him my senior year of high school. And I was going to study Israel, the history of Israel, the entire year. And he was just kind of shocked by how kind of unconditionally pro-Israel I was. And he asked me a question, pretty early on in my senior year of high school that changed my life. And he said, "Now, do you know anything about Palestinian history?" And he didn't ask it in an aggressive way. He was just wondering. And I began thinking about it. I really trusted this teacher. He was a huge mentor of mine. And I began realizing that the traditional pro-Israel narratives that I was reading, that kind of the traditional Zionist story, didn't really mention Palestinians at all. It only mentioned Arabs, if anything. But that narrative, that traditional narrative, either pretended that Palestinians didn't exist, or if it acknowledged their existence, that they were something to be dealt with, that they were basically, a people that were unimportant, that were less significant than the Jewish people, and that, our liberation was more important than theirs. And I began to realize that slowly, and over the course of that year, that teacher gave me a variety of history books by both Palestinian historians, especially Edward Said and Rashid Khalidi. But even more important to me in many ways was reading left-wing Israeli historians who spoke openly about the Nakba and the occupation as matter-of-fact phenomenon. And it was actually reading these Jewish historians who were talking about these extremely disturbing phenomena, but doing it from a place of Jewishness and not risking their Jewishness, that I realized that I too could learn about Palestinian history and Palestinian society without risking my Jewish identity. And so that set me on this path. When I got to college, I met so many people who were kind of like the main protagonists in our film, who had gone to Jewish day school, who had a much more intense pro-Israel education than I had, but had never met Palestinians. And I saw what happened to them over and over and over and over again when they simply met Palestinians or had Palestinian professors or learned basic facts about Palestinian history. And the traditional pro-Israel narrative they were raised with began to unravel, because when you learn that other side, it's very difficult to hold on to the kind of traditional unconditional support for Israel. And I spent 3 months living in Israel, Palestine. When I was 21, I took a semester off from college. That's where I met Baha, one of the main protagonists in the film. And even though I was very anti-occupation by that point, actually seeing the occupation firsthand, as well as walking through 1948 Israel and seeing the destroyed Palestinian villages from the Nakba was deeply profound for me, and made me realize that my own story of transformation, that of my friends, was part of a much larger, powerful transformation that could have some impact on creating collective liberation for both Palestinians and Jewish folks around the world. And so it's been really an honor to get to tell this story. Simone has been such a powerful person in my life, and we're really kind of using her story to tell both my own story as well as the story of our generation. And lastly, obviously, the film has a variety of audiences we're trying to reach. Obviously, one of those major audiences is American Jews, but it's also been really incredible to see the response of Palestinian folks, both in the diaspora as well as in Palestine itself. Obviously, Palestinian folks know the story of the Nakba and the occupation like the back of their hand, but I think what's been most interesting to hear from Palestinians is a lot of Palestinians don't know why progressive Jewish communities are so unconditionally pro-Israel, and why they're oftentimes unwilling to acknowledge or see, basic facts about Palestinian existence. And so kind of showing that process of kind of pro-Israel education, I think has been quite powerful for a lot of folks, as well as seeing the transformation. I think seeing hundreds of thousands of American Jews say "not in my name" and say that we are going to fight for Palestinian liberation, while also, holding on to our Jewish identities, I think has been powerful. So it's been a real honor that the film has been valued by so many Jewish communities as well as Palestinian folks across the world.
Thank you so much. Simone, if I can ask you, so Simone was you're the first person to invite me to my first, if not now, action on Tisha B'Av against the Gaza war of 2014. And we read the names of Palestinians and Israelis who were killed in the 2014 Gaza war. That was a taboo in our community. There was a taboo in the organized Jewish community. Some rabbis got even in trouble for mentioning Palestinian children who were killed. That, you know, only Israeli humanity matters. And basically the idea that you can learn about the Holy Land in Israel without the completely decoupling Palestinian experience, culture, history, and the struggle. And every day I hear, and obviously 2014 was very traumatizing and polarizing time for our community. I mean, there's so many friendships broke out. The community was super polarized. And every day now I hear about another Jewish family bitterly divided between generations. Generational lines seem to be hitting every family in ways that many people don't know how to deal with. Can you speak about the generational divide in the shift of us versus them narratives in our Jewish community, in the pushback against those unwilling to accept Hasbara and dehumanize Palestinians in the name of keeping us safe? You've been on the front line of this for many years, and kind of your experience about what's the nature of this generational divide and where you see it going.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Gili, and thank you everybody for being here with us. I have to say, I think for me that, you know, when I was a freshman in college, I read an article by Peter Beinart that was called "The Failure of the American Jewish Establishment," where he talked about how young Jews were being asked, you know, raised with this idea that Zionism and liberalism were compatible identities. And then in the name of Zionism, we were being asked to defend deeply illiberal policies. And that if forced to choose between those contradictory positions, that young Jews would check their Zionism at the door instead of their liberalism. And I think that warning has really come to pass. I think that narrative does feel true for me in what I have seen over the last decade, which is that, you know, especially I think for young American Jews who, you know, are watching the racial justice uprisings in this country, who are developing political consciousness around, you know, racism and inequality and climate justice and all these different, you know, intersecting issues that we see American support for Israeli apartheid as a core part of this kind of like unjust world that we are against. And of course, specifically the way America continues to fund and back all the injustices happening on the ground over there. And, you know, I can say that I was raised with, you know, a bunch of mythology about, you know, the Israeli military is the most moral army in the world, and Israel is the only democracy in the Middle East, and Israel is this weak and embattled country that is just seeking peace. And I mean, you know, right now it feels almost kind of absurd to talk about some of those things right now, as all of those myths are just being shattered in front of us. The IDF is committing unspeakable war crimes, and, you know, what the International Court of Justice considers a genocide in Gaza. It's very clear that Israel does not want peace. Israel continues to reject ceasefire agreements, is not working to bring home the hostages, is actively inflaming tensions in the region. And the whole situation in which you have half of the people living under this rule of this government, not just under, you know, under, you know, a whole host of discrimination and oppression and ethnic cleansing and state violence. And like, what is democratic about any of that? And so, and there's with social media, with all of the ways that young people have access to information, to stories from Palestinians on the ground, access to Palestinian history and writings, it's just much harder to maintain that veneer and those mythologies. And, you know, and then to add on top of that, the fact that like the US government is so complicit in in lying on behalf of Israel and trying to whitewash something that we can all see very clearly on our own phone screens, I think is a very shattering and transforming experience. And I don't think that we are going to go back to a mythological past that perhaps simply never existed. We understand that what is happening today is as a result of the Nakba, is the continuation of the Nakba. So yeah, was there a second part, Gili, that you wanted me to answer?
In terms of our communal dynamics, just, the dehumanization of Palestinians in our community, like the ADL does and such like that, corrupts the community. I mean, it corrupts our, now they're supporting white supremacy. So the dehumanization of Palestinians, either by Israeli Jews or by American Jews, by the community, corrupts ourselves. And we see it where, it was so convenient to punt on the occupation, to not talk about it, to say, it's too divisive or it's too, but the occupation corrupted the institutions themselves, the dehumanization of it. Israeli Jews who did not want to deal with the occupation when it was oppressing Palestinians, I now have to deal with the same characters that were running the occupation and are product of the occupation, now destroying Israel, destroying the infrastructure, the sense of democracy for Jews, and all the things they took for granted by the same forces that got cultivated by oppressing Palestinians. In our community too, the dehumanization of Palestinians has a cost of corruption. Dehumanizing corrupts, and we seem to be on this moment of deep polarization in our community about what it is mean to what values do we hold and what actually keeps us safe. I think that's a real conversation that seems to polarize the community, families, about what keeps us safe. Humanizing Palestinians does not keep us safe. I think we're clear on that. So just if anything you want to say about that.
Yeah, I mean, I think, one of the worst camps in the world to be in, over the last 9 months was the, I see myself as part of the community, the Israeli human rights community, Palestinian human rights community, international solidarity community that has been saying for years, for decades, that this situation on the ground is unsustainable. It is getting worse. Denying Palestinian freedom for this long only breeds more resentment, more oppression, more insecurity, more instability. And this is where we are now. And it's a absolutely heartbreaking and maddening, devastating experience to have been part of a community that certainly did not predict how catastrophically apocalyptic, what is happening in Gaza is right now, but was warning that this situation on the ground was not sustainable, certainly not for Palestinians, but also not for Israelis. And I think it is true that there's a real security risk for, October 7th, there's a real cost to Israeli society for choosing to ignore and support the mass oppression of and dispossession of the Palestinian people. And when we come back over here to the United States, we're in a situation where organizations and communities that have chosen defending Israeli apartheid as their number one commitment and their number one, the number one way that they consider to how we fight anti-Semitism and how we keep Jews safe, has directly led to all these organizations from the Anti-Defamation League, to AIPAC, to Jewish federations, prioritizing policies that are about criminalizing protests, that are about criminalizing, expressions of even Palestinian identity, describing the reality on the ground, passing laws such as the IHRA definition of anti-Semitism, trying to codify criticism of Israel as anti-Semitism, passing anti-boycott legislation, And then, of course, this deepening alliance with and normalization of the far right in this country, this rising fascist movement that is very pro-Israel and much of it very anti-Semitic. And it's a truly, it's such a devastating and scary time to be living through, in which we've just seen, I can say, so much of the American Jewish community making choices that I just find so contrary to our own self-interest and well-being as a people, and morally and politically short-sighted.
Thank you. Sami, I first met Sami during the Center for Jewish Nonviolence delegation that participated in the Samud Freedom Camp in the South Hebron Hills in Masafariata. And Sami had, hearing Sami speak had a profound impact on me, like on many others, to understand the Palestinian reality and struggle to stay on the land. I mean, that's what I didn't get, honestly, in the ongoing Nakba, and also about partnership. So one of the most powerful scenes for me in the film is when, Sami, you described the conversation your dad has with an Israeli soldier, and also the last scene when you talk about joint struggle, about how do we build the partnership to fight together, a very difficult thing to do. Can you speak about, from your perspective, the transformation necessary for such partnerships? What are the challenges and opportunities of building coalitions with Israelis, with Israeli and American Jews who oppose supremacy in the land, who want something else? And and what type of transformation is required by Palestinians for such partnership?
Yeah, thank you, Gili, for this invitation. And I just have to say at first, I am at awe and honored to be with such a group, such a panel of visionary leaders, not just speakers, people who are truly setting the stage for what is to come next, and are prophetically standing in that place where they know, as prophets, they will be first rejected by their own community. But that's what prophets have done throughout history. Their first rejection was their own community, and then their message was heard, and then a generation took that message and flew with it. And so thank you, Erin, Simone, Gili, Tiffany, all of you, the whole team, for everything that you're doing. And I think it's very important for us to understand this concept of partnership. As Palestinians, I feel that we fully acknowledge and recognize that this system of colonialism is not a system like other countries that will simply either disappear or people go back to where they came from. As Palestinians, there is also a deep acknowledgement, even in our own religious backgrounds, of the Hebrew Jewish existence and presence in this land, and that the teachings that were carried by these prophetic voices are teachings that continue to manifest themselves in Christianity and Islam of this land as well. And so for me, it becomes quite a surprise how an ideology that was only about creating dualism and separation and empowerment over one community over another was so willingly adapted. And as we know very well, not adapted by the religious Jewish community of that time, but by a secular community that was only interested in creating a colonial system. But sadly, that became the mainstream, that became the common language. And that became that because that system then understood, as it continues to do now, that fear is the greatest motivator of human behavior. Once we plant fear in people's minds and people's hearts, fear of others, no matter what they say, no matter what they do, the other side, fear will lead us. And then you have the leaders that plant the seed, and then they tell you how they can help you address the fear. And the only way, historically, in the state of Israel, the only way to address this fear has been through militarism, through racism, through empowering yourself over others. And as many of you know very well from my experience of visiting the death camps of Auschwitz and Birkenau, I heard that firsthand. I heard Israeli teachers tell children, teenagers, Israeli Jewish kids, if the Palestinians have an opportunity, they'll do to you what the Nazis did to your ancestors. This is why we have to be strong. This is why we have to suppress them. This is why we have to dominate. This is why we can never trust them. How can any child grow up seeking peace if this is the ideology, the framework that they grow up in? And as the movie shows very well, it's not just the Israeli Jewish community, it's also the American Jewish community, the Canadian Jewish community, the British Jewish community that has fully fallen into this narrative, into this falsehood of a narrative. And so I think for us as Palestinians, there is an understanding of that. There is a deep connection to the Jewish roots of Judaism in this land, as well as all religions. And let us not forget, we talk about wars and conflict in this land, and this land has witnessed many wars and conflict, but also has witnessed many, many years and decades and centuries of peace and coexistence between the communities. And this is something we fully acknowledge here as well. And so this is a joint struggle in a way. It is a joint struggle for our joint liberation. It is a struggle where, for me, I'm going to say this personally, as a person who has studied, who has learned, who has experienced Judaism from so many wonderful teachers around the world, it is something I want to celebrate. It is not something I want to be afraid of. It is something I want to honor. I want to share with my daughters and with others. That essence of the values of what this faith was all about. Justice. In the Torah, there's more acknowledgement of the word justice than even in the New Testament. Where is that? Why has this been lost? Where can we seek it and reclaim it and then build it again together? And so joint liberation is key for us. It does not negate what we experience as Palestinians when we say joint liberation, because we're not talking about equal, two groups of people that need liberation. There is, as Simone, as everybody has said, there is a asymmetry of power. There is the occupier and the occupied. There is the oppressor and the oppressed. And there is the need for resistance, and there is the need for sumud, steadfastness in our land, and there is the need for us to come together and face those who reject peace and those who reject justice for all the people here. And so for me, I do call upon all of us to really take a step into this space. If your own community rejects you in such a way for believing in peace and justice and reconciliation, then you are on the right track. This is my encouragement to you. Do not fall back. Do not fall into the pressure. I've been quite surprised that the more Israelism has spread globally, the more, actually, it's quite recent that I'm starting to hear so much of the rejection towards the film. And so for me, this is the sign of success. And this is, for me, the encouragement. I'll end by saying that I've always said and always believe that one of the major and key players that will bring and manifest a real sense of peace and justice to our land is the American Jewish community. And this is why the battle is actually being fought in the United States as much as it is fought here. The American Jewish community will be the voice that will put a stop to the genocide, that will put a stop to the ongoing Nakba, that will change policy in the United States. I know this is a very, very difficult battle for all of you, but this is the battle that you are fighting, and we fully support you and encourage you, and we'll do our part here. As you asked me, within the Palestinian community, yes, there are many, many challenges that we face, many issues that we face. There is levels of corruption. There is levels of fighting between political factions over power, over something that doesn't even exist. This is our stuff. We have to deal with it. And then we are dealing with it, and we have to deal with it more. Supporting what is happening in the Palestinian liberation movement doesn't mean we support a political faction or another political faction. Actually, most Palestinians don't support either Hamas or Fatah, if I want to be honest with you and acknowledge this. They want to be liberated. They want to be free. They want to live in equality, in justice, in raising their families. We want to see the people return to Gaza. My mother's family is from Gaza. We had to pull them out 2 months ago. The only conversation I have with them is, when are we going back to Gaza? Imagine a family that lost everything. This is what Palestinianism is about. This is what it means to connect to the land. This is what it means to really feel a deep love to the land, to your homeland, to your ancestral homeland in that way. And I really, really wish Jews in Israel and around the world will begin to see that level of love and compassion, where the land can really encompass all of us and take us all in and love us all and provide for all of us. This is the peace that we seek, and I believe we will be able to make it.
Thank you, Sami. And to add to that, our own liberation here is intimately connected to the liberation of all people in the land. We see it now more than ever with the rise of authoritarianism here in America, and how connected it is, how intertwined it is with the struggles of liberation in the land. So thank you so much. So please continue sending questions. I'm getting a bunch here. Erin, if you can talk a little bit about October 7 and how that affected the film. October 7 was very difficult for us, all of us. Friends of mine lost a family, and I got to say, I was pretty broken. We decided to pause the screenings. And until October 7, we did find that the American Jewish community, the organized American Jewish community, some parts of it was interested in this conversation, in this film. And after October 7, there was such polarization and such trauma and divide that we find it even harder to have a conversation about the reality of our community. In our community. So I have many questions here about what changed after October 7 with the film, and how what it means for the mission of the film.
Definitely. And I also really want to quickly thank the members of our team. There's a couple of members of our team in the audience right now. I really want to thank Ben Linder, as well as Carol and Terry Winograd, for whom we wouldn't have been able to make the film. So I'm really grateful to everybody who supported the film and who is here right now. Yeah, it's a great question about how October 7th shifted the film. So I think one of the reasons why our film, there's a number of reasons why I think our film kind of became a lightning rod right after October 7th. Part of it was just kind of insane timing. We released our final trailer about 2 weeks before October 7th. And then when we released our trailer, announced our first kind of 60 major screening dates across the country. So we announced this big 60-date tour, primarily at college campuses. And then right after October 7th, especially when a lot of fervor began on college campuses around the limits of free speech, our film was kind of there in the milieu, screening at all these campuses across the country. And that got a lot of folks on the left very excited in the film. And then also folks on the right who were looking for things to cancel. Our film kind of became something in their sights. And it became something that a lot of far right groups began organizing around to try to cancel. And what's interesting is that why I think also why our film kind of caught on after that is that a lot of the language that the far right groups were using to try to cancel our film was basically exactly the language that we talk about in the film. That's often used from the pro-Israel right to try to silence voices critical of Israel, be they Palestinian, Jewish, or other. And so it was deeply ironic that, again, under the kind of guise of protecting Jewish students, oftentimes right-wing groups were trying to cancel and smear a film made almost entirely by Jewish people, including Emmy and Peabody-winning Jewish filmmakers, about the American Jewish community, almost always being brought to campuses by progressive Jewish groups. So again, kind of a lot of the most absurd cases were where a university president would cancel a screening or try to cancel a screening that was being brought to the campus by Jewish students and faculty members. And the panel was going to be primarily Jewish folks talking about Jewish identity. And these right-wing groups would try to cancel us and say that our film was basically dangerous to Jews. And I think, so that is, I think, one of the major reasons why our film became interesting to a lot of folks. And I think a lot of the phenomenon that we cover in the film generally, even though our film was made well before October 7th, accelerated after October 7th. The deep divisions and polarization within the American Jewish community that our film describes and shows certainly became accelerated after October 7th. APAC and the ADL and many other orgs have for decades tried to make it seem like the American Jewish community is united in their unconditional support for Israel. That's never been true. That's never been the case. There's always been dissenting voices, but those dissenting voices have grown precipitously, exponentially in the past couple of decades. And especially after October 7th, that polarization and division became even more apparent. So I think our film helped capture and show the ways and the reasons why our community was so polarized and so divided, and gave voice to so many Jewish folks who were horrified by what was happening in Gaza, but who were being told by their community that you are a bad Jewish person or you're a self-hating Jew if you simply care about Palestinian lives. So it was a very interesting time. We often get asked as well, what would you do how would you, change the film if you could remake the film now? And that's a very difficult question to ask, partly because this moment is not over, right? We could, if we finished filming right now, we would have one film. If we finished filming 6 months ago, we'd have a very different film. If we finished filming now, we would obviously tell a story of absolute devastation in Gaza, but it could get far worse. And so we don't actually know how this moment will end, and we don't know what this moment will mean, for the larger arc of freedom and justice for the people who live between the river and the sea. So it's been, the honor of my lifetime to have helped create a resource that so many people have been able to connect to. I think, again, especially, Jewish folks who were horrified by what was going on, we're just really trying to figure out a home for themselves. I think a lot of folks felt incredibly lonely and abandoned by their communities who overwhelmingly supported the war. And we're looking to find Jewish communities that were both deeply Jewish, but also stood up for the progressive Jewish values of peace and justice for all that they hold so dearly. And I think our film helped do that. And obviously, again, we wouldn't have a film if it wasn't for groups like If Not Now that Simone helped create, that really are the folks that were highlighting. If it wasn't for those groups, we wouldn't have anything. So hopefully our film has been able to help those groups grow and help tell those groups' stories to a much larger audience.
And let me add that the thing in the screenings that always moves me the most is when someone comes and says, "Hey, thank you for telling my story." I feel seen, like I feel validated, and it was extremely empowering.
No doubt. Yeah, I'll just say one other thing really quickly is that, there's been a lot of, pretty wild things said about our film, but when people actually watch our film, even folks who are pretty, conservative, they're usually able to realize that our film is just telling the very common stories of hundreds of thousands of American Jews. Even if you are, unconditionally pro-Israel, and there's been many people who are unconditionally pro-Israel, but have watched our film and said, look, even though we don't agree with everything the film's saying, the film does show pretty obviously that we are not doing a good job teaching young people about Israel. If so many young, even if your goal is to make people unconditionally pro-Israel, clearly what our film shows, and what If Not Now shows, is that young people are deeply unhappy with how we have been taught about Israel. We feel en masse that we have not been told the truth about Israeli history, just like many of us who went to public school in America feel we did not get told the truth about American history. And so it's very interesting, to be in this space. But again, when people actually watch our film and engage with it, I think they are able to realize that even if they don't agree with it, the phenomenon our film shows of these hundreds of thousands of American Jews, fighting against the establishment and fighting against status quo is undeniable, and is a very common phenomenon and a common feeling in the Jewish community at this point.
And we had some screenings that J Street U organized, inviting both Palestinians and more establishment Jewish students on university campuses that were super polarized. They did not have a space to talk about these different ways to navigate what was going on together. And they were extremely successful. People sense after the film that they could talk about how they feel, where they are, where no other space will allow them, because every other space was war. And the film allowed for this conversation about identity and transformation that others didn't. Simone, if I can ask you, I get a few questions here about basically how do we think and navigate on partnership here in America, given the imbalance of power, given that us as Jews can go to Israel at any time, we can, we had this experience at AIPAC that really taught me this, where we protested at AIPAC, the police was kind and they were considerate and they negotiated. And when Palestinians came to protest AIPAC right after us in 2017, they were met with riot gear and extremely violent posture of the police. I was like, wow, we're doing the exact same thing. So but given that privilege, when we think about talking about centering humanity and trying to build partnerships with the community that's invested in dividing us, in a political system that invested in dividing us, and the growing gaps because of October 7 trauma in our community, between the two narratives and between the two national movements, how do we think about dealing with weaponization of anti-Semitism and anti-Semitism when it arises either from ignorance or from misconception or just hatred of Jews within the pro-Palestinian solidarity movement we're trying to have a relationship with, in partnership with?
Yeah, there's a couple different things I want to say to that question that might seem a little bit contradictory, but I think that it is the responsibility of those of us, with access to power or privilege, both to do that hard work of learning and unlearning in our own communities, and to, and I'm really grateful that the film has been a tool for that. And I think that, it has been an incredible resource to college students, but I know we haven't even begun the process of kind of some of the harder conversations. I think people are I hear a lot from young people who are showing this film at home with their parents. I also hear from older people who are, this has been my story. This has been my experience for so long. And I'm so grateful, to see so many people in the movement now. And so it is important for me to say also that it's not just a generational thing. There have always been dissenting voices in the American Jewish community. And actually one of the strategies of consolidating American support for Israel has been this decades-long attacking, demonizing, marginalizing voices inside the American Jewish community that spoke clearly about Palestinian human rights, the need for, seriously reckoning with the need for Palestinian freedom, and those Jews who did make the connection between their Jewish values, their own Jewish experiences, and the oppression and the horrors that Palestinians have been experiencing. So I did want to say that I don't think this is a new thing, but I think it is receiving a particular energy right now in this moment. But it's on us to keep having those hard conversations and to force our communities and our loved ones to do that work. And it also is on us to grapple more with this question of impunity. And I think that one of the things you mentioned earlier, Gili, and it's, a constant theme here, is just things on the ground are getting so much worse because there is absolutely no accountability for every step of extremism, of violence, of violation that is being committed by the state of Israel against the Palestinian people. And and the fact that, America says, here's a red line, Israel crosses the red line, and we say, well, we didn't like that, but we're going to send you, more 500-ton bombs. And that's where we are right now. And we need to have a serious conversation about stopping the flow of weapons to Israel right now. And it's the longer this goes on, the longer there is no accountability, the more the conditions for radicalization, for reactionary politics, for politics of despair becomes even more ripe. And I think we're already seeing that in this country. And I think that connects to the conversation about anti-Semitism, which is, Peter Beinart has written about how it's actually a very American tradition to blame ethnic groups for the actions of government overseas or for groups abroad that they are perceived as being affiliated with. So it's actually not just Jews who receive the blowback of the horrible things Israel committed. Asian Americans have been the targets of violence when there has been anti-China sentiment in this country, of course, Islamophobia. Like it's important for me to mention also right now that actually the people in America who have been on the most severe and direct end of violence as a result of everything that's been happening on the ground has been Palestinians. There have been multiple violent attacks against Palestinians. Of course, the 6-year-old boy was killed in Chicago at the end of last year. The 3 boys who were shot in Vermont while wearing keffiyehs. Just recently, there was an incident of a woman trying to drown Palestinian kids in a pool in Texas. So these are the conditions that are created with not just the anti-Palestinian racism that is the byproduct of everything happening on the ground, and the anti-Palestinian racism that is very, very deep in our politics and our media environment here in the US. And that is important to talk about as we also talk about the anti-Semitism that has been fueled in this moment, because it's actually, we're not going to stop any of this without taking on all of these things holistically and together, understanding that like the causes of violence in this country. And then on top of that, we need to reckon with what the groups who are the loudest and most powerful voices who claim to be fighting anti-Semitism, what they are doing with that power. So, once again, to mention the Anti-Defamation League, I mean, this is an organization who regularly compares anti-war, anti-genocide protesters to white supremacists. They include Jewish anti-war protests, including, if not now, in Jewish Voice for Peace. They've included those protests in their lists of incidents of anti-Semitic incidents. So actually, we don't even have clear data about how bad the anti-Semitism is in this country, because the people responsible for educating us and fighting anti-Semitism are actually using their platforms. The head of the ADL also used his platform to call for Columbia to send the National Guard in to attack student protesters at Columbia University. And so I think it is incumbent upon those of us who want to see a safe future for Jews and Palestinians to like absolutely resist the way that the fight against anti-Semitism is being co-opted as part of this broader authoritarian right-wing project. We are seeing the way that the fight against anti-Semitism is being used as the excuse to try to cancel courses at universities that teach history that make people uncomfortable, right? That's, of course, like in some ways at the core, I think one of the messages of Israelism. That's why so many people want to cancel screenings of this film, because it is about those of us who have not just grappled with history, but been transformed by it. And of course, in America, there's a lot of other history in this country that they don't, that there is a movement that's very invested in us not knowing that history. So from that to like increased militarization and policing in our communities, none of that makes Jews safer. And I would even say on top of that, the idea that Jews are kind of being used as the excuse or as the kind of face of this right-wing authoritarian rollout and assault that we are seeing endangers Jews, because it fuels these ideas about Jews being this group who's, receiving of special treatment and, connected to people in power, which are also some of the core aspects of anti-Semitic thought. And so I think we should also be really worried thinking about Netanyahu coming to speak in Congress next week. What is he going to do? I mean, we know he's going to invoke anti-Semitism. We know he's going to position himself as the defender of world Jewry. Of course, has presided over the most insecure time for Jewish people in the last, more than half century, as he then invokes the Holocaust to justify the genocide that he is presiding over. So we need to be really worried about that. And we need to be really worried also about the way that his public messaging as this, racist, authoritarian war criminal, corrupt war criminal, all of that is a deeply aligned position with not just the right in America, but with this global right. And we're in a moment in which democracy feels so fragile and so under attack. And I think anybody who considers themselves a defender of democracy, human rights, rule of law, international law, should be deeply, deeply worried about anybody normalizing Netanyahu's presence in Washington. The idea that he is going to be rewarded again for crossing all of these red lines that the US has ostensibly put out is just another one of these moments of the weakening of our democratic norms and positions. And I think all of that endangers, of course, Palestinians and is leading to a deeper instability for people living on the ground. That makes a ceasefire less likely. It makes the possibility of anybody but the far right being like it empowers the far right having him in Congress, but I also think it endangers Jews around the world to once again be associated with this project.
And AFCFP is organizing a protest against Netanyahu, and I gotta say that families of the hostages are also protesting Netanyahu. I mean, he's sacrificing the hostages and being rewarded and destroying.
Absolutely.
While he's being welcomed in Washington, there's a big call to him to boycott his speech and not normalize it, like you say. This is putting all of us unsafe. Sami, there's a question here. I'm so happy to hear tackle this about generational trauma. And if you can speak a little bit more about generational trauma, as an Israeli, I was thanks to people like you, I understood that what's happening in Gaza is directly related to the Nakba and the fears of mass expulsion. As an Israeli, the October 7th for me triggered definitely all the fears I was fed that Hamas, if they only could, they'd just kill us all. And to see that really brought back Holocaust and all that, it's in my bones, it's in my soul. And I really, after October 7th, I felt, wow, they will kill us all. It took me a couple of days, of course, and I got to say the CFP movement was really good at grounding me in this reality and giving me a compass. But if you can talk a little about generational trauma and how it plays today and how do we address it or think about it?
Yeah, as I shared before, that was the big transforming point of my life as an activist. Until that point, for me as an activist, it was just about resistance and liberation and freeing the land so that a Palestinian state can be established. And then we see what happened. After my experience in Auschwitz and after reading a lot on this issue, I began to realize that peacemaking needs to include as a key component in it the healing of our collective trauma. And I would say especially for those who are the oppressors in such a situation like this, because this is again where fear is being used and manipulated to engage in more violence and more suppression and justify ethnic cleansing and justifying genocide as we see continue to happen. For me, sadly, it was no surprise that the day of October 7th and right after, Israeli politicians immediately invoked the Holocaust, invoked 9/11, Pearl Harbor, you name it. Any tragedy that hit the Western world was invoked as justifying the genocide that started and continues until this day. And this is why it's very important that we need to create a leadership that are able to speak a new language, to speak a new story, to honor what happened, to recognize what happened. Definitely, there is absolutely no denial and rejection at all of the tragedy of the Holocaust and what happened during the years of the Second World War. But part of the transformation work is to put it where it belongs and not to use it and justify it to continue to rally people for ideologies that only aim to create more destruction and give people like Netanyahu and others more power over their own community. And so it is a process, and it is a deep process, because one of the big challenges when it comes to collective trauma is that when it is repeated so much in the narrative of a child, of a teenager, of an adult, it doesn't just become a story, it becomes part of our identity. As Jews, we are this. We are continuous victims. As Jews, everybody hates us. As Jews, every generation and nation rises up to destroy us. It's very, very deeply embedded in the narrative of identity itself. And for that, what needs to happen is a deep process of deep self-reflection, as we've been talking about, to reconnect to the values of what it means to be a Jew, what it means to be a Muslim, what it means to be a Christian, what it means to be whatever identity that I carry, that I am part of, that I need to be proud of. And to say, I put that history and experience where it belongs. I learn from it. I do the things not to repeat what happened in a deep way, not to really to go back into that history and learn what happened and not repeat it. But then I say, what is the future I want to create? What is the future I want to create that is independent from the past that I experienced? What does it mean to live as a Jew with Palestinians in equality and justice? What can I do to invite Palestinians to recognize and acknowledge my right to live here as a Jew in this land, as an equal to them? And then that conversation is where healing happens. And it will be a shift in the story. As Simone said earlier, we are now at a pivotal point where there was a story of the past, and now a new story is being created. We are responsible for writing that new story for the future generation. That mythology of the past is gone. There is a reality now, and there is a new narrative that we need to create together. And this is where healing happens. And we will see, we're talking about anti-Semitism. Anti-Semitism, I'm not going to say will disappear, but the levels of it will decline so much, as we all know and acknowledge, when there is peace and justice in this land, when Jews and Christians and Muslims, Palestinians and Israelis are celebrating life with each other. We stand together to reject anti-Semitism at that point, not to use it and abuse it as we have done in the past. It is, again, acknowledging the traumas of the past, but to say, I will create a future that is independent of that narrative, to create a new story that we could all live in together.
Thank you, Sami. We say in the movement, we're not on separate side, we're on the same side. We're on the side of that story, and we write it together, and it's very powerful. Also, Suli likes to say, we're not, the land doesn't belong to the people belong to the land, and that connection to the land is so deeply profound. So we have only a few minutes left, and Erin, there's a few questions about the film. How do people promote it? How do people organize screenings? How do people support it? Yeah.
Great question. Yeah, what's great is that anybody in the world can organize their own screening super easily. We created a really simple automated screening system. So if you go to Israelismfilm.com, or I'll put it into, I'll try to send it to everybody, or if someone can put this into the entire group chat, bit.ly /screen Israelism. So I'm sending that, and hopefully someone can send that to the whole group. But yeah, if you go to Israelismfilm.com, there's a thing that says organize your own screening. It's super simple. It's sliding scale depending upon if you're in a small organization or an individual or a nonprofit and stuff like that. Please spread the word about the film. We do a lot with social media, so we release a lot of short videos and graphics, especially testimonials relating to themes that we explore more fully in the film. So please spread the word that way if you can. Yeah, and thank you so much to the folks who just put it in the group chat. And yeah, and please just tell your friends and family members about it. I think, again, as Simone said, I think one of the most powerful things you can do if you like the film is to show it to people who, might be initially unwilling to have these conversations. I think this film can be a way to open up those conversations, and again, show folks who don't disagree with us, who don't agree with us, why we feel the way we do. Even that's oftentimes how we get it into kind of more conservative space. We say, look, you don't have to agree with what we're saying, but if you want to actually understand why so many young American Jews feel the way we do, both betrayed by members of our community who we feel did not do an accurate job telling us about the accurate history of Israel-Palestine, and also are horrified when they find out about the occupation and the Nakba and our community's historic complicity in injustices against the Palestinian people. So again, I think our film helps just explain, the phenomenon that, Simone and so many other folks represent. Another question someone has asked: how can you watch the film if you're not organizing a screening? The great news is that as of about 5 weeks ago, a little more than 5 weeks ago, our film is on almost all major digital platforms. You can watch it on Apple TV, Amazon Prime, YouTube, Google Play, Fandango, Microsoft, Vimeo, all those sites. If you go to Israelism Film, again, our website, links are there, or you can just search Israelism on really any of those sites. And again, we're really honored that so many folks are watching our film. Our film has been a top 10 documentary on Apple TV for over 5 weeks now. And it was the #1 documentary for the first 10 days that it was there, which is amazing. We've also gotten a lot more backlash the past few weeks as the film has kind of gotten into the mainstream and reached the mainstream a bit more. But as Sami said, I think the folk, when folks, react negatively to it or try to attack us, especially if they haven't seen the film, that shows that, we are, ruffling some feathers and that we are stirring the pot and trying to force this very difficult but truly necessary conversation within our community. So again, you can organize your own screening anytime, any place. It can be private or public, virtual or in person, and anybody can watch the film on all major digital platforms right now. And thank you all again so much for your interest in the film. And again, thank you so much to Sami. Again, you're such a huge inspiration to us, everybody on our team. And it's been really an honor to get to include you in our film. And obviously, thank you so much, Simone. We would not have the film if it wasn't for you. And then Gili, our incredible executive producer, who really kind of was the first person to believe in the film. So it's really amazing. And again, Combatants for Peace is such a critical organization, and we're honored to get to share so much space with you.
Thank you so much, Erin. I'm gonna throw it to Tiffany. Just thank you so much. It means a lot. We like to say that the film is the beginning of the conversation, not the end of the conversation. And the stories we can imagine together for a future of freedom and equality for all Palestinians and Israelis and all people around the world. So thank you so much for being here. It means a lot. And Tiffany, thank you.
Thank you everyone for joining us. Thank you so much to our speakers and moderator, and to create some clarity and make it our next film screening go more smoothly. So we did have a lot of questions from folks about, is the film being screened right now on the Zoom? And one, we apologize if it wasn't clear in advance. So we provide a link for everyone to watch the film prior to the talk. You can watch it independently on your own time. And then we're providing these talks following about a 1 to 2 week period where you can screen the films on your own. So we have 2 more films in our series, and we'll announce what those are in an email to come. But please take the opportunity to watch those films in advance before our talk. I also just want to ask for those of you who are near DC next week to please join Gili, me, many of our partners and allies in denormalizing Netanyahu's visit. We are going to protest his visit and speech to Congress, and we are also going to call for a ceasefire, prisoner hostage deal, aid to Gaza, peace and safety for all, and collective liberation, because all these things, as Simone pointed out, a holistic approach to healing and activism are what is needed right now. And I just want to thank you all who paid for a ticket, who donated a ticket. All of your donations go directly to education programs in Israel, Palestine, and the US. Supports our freedom schools and our education activism. So we thank you all for your support and look forward to seeing you soon.